This is Data Malarkey, the podcast about using data smarter. Every organization is driven by data, but how can you turn it into powerful storytelling? By asking the right questions, discovering the insights, and building your data story. This is the podcast that talks to leaders and thinkers around the world about how they use data smarter, so you can too. Welcome to Data Malarkey.
Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Sam Knowles, and joining us today from Berlin is Professor Anna Addy. Anna is the head of the Department of Corporate Communications at Quadriga University in Berlin, Quadriga University of Applied Sciences. She describes herself as a digital humanist, and we'll be coming back to that description shortly. And her work focuses on online strategic communications. Now, this includes both corporate social responsibility and also activist communication, and she has a special interest and expertise in communications that features innovative and online-based research methods. I hope that's a decent description of you, Anna. Is there anything that you'd like to add and anything that I got wrong? Welcome, by the way. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. We've been looking forward. I mean, I have been looking forward to this for quite a bit, so I'm grateful we finally made it. Some things have changed. I'm still very interested in innovative research methods, and I'm always trying to crash traditional methods and hack into something, ways of doing research that we thought we should. But I do that carefully with always a reflection of how we do it. Some things have changed. I'm still a professor at Quadriga University of Applied Sciences, but we have scraped the department. What I have gotten in return is I've been appointed vice president, which is a great honor, and it's very nice to be able to brag about.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It's not my doing. It's really my colleagues who decided and bestowed this upon me, and I'm grateful that they thought I'm worthy. There's one other thing. I still remain incredibly interested in activist communication. But a lot of the research that I've done in recent years has focused more on the future of public relations and comms and the impact and social value that we want them to have. And I think in these polarized times, it kind of makes sense to ask that question. The other thing that I've been doing is look more into the representation and experiences of women in public relations. And that's also very much informed by the fact that there are more and more women into public relations. And yet, there are so many differences. Boards still tend to be very predominantly male. All these gendering experiences means that on the one hand, the profession grows and we have more opportunities, including possibilities to break the glass ceiling. What happens is that when a profession gets feminized, so there are more women in it, we start to think that it's less worthy. And all of a sudden, pay decreases, we belittle it, we don't think it's, much worth its salt. And I'm really, really fascinated by that. So this is what I've been doing in recent years.
Very cool. And am I right in thinking that you, given that we're on a podcast, but you actually you have a podcast that looks at women in communications and public relations as well?
That's right. I do. And thanks for mentioning that. It's something that I've started as what I thought an alternative education initiative. Our students are at executive level, and so we do teach mature, what you would qualify as mature students. They're highly experienced, and so to me, it's really important to consider all these things that I do as an academic, theory, research. But to me, it's really important that what we do gets to who we want to get. And I'm fully aware that my students have full lives, like really full lives, beyond coming to school. So the podcast idea started with this genuine desire of presenting women that embraced PR and made it shine. And this is what we're saying. But it has a mission, is to present research that is not traditionally seen as mainstream PR. So we're not talking about excellence in public relations, demonstrating our value to the board, justifying ourselves, but rather we're looking at different theories. So we talk about emotional labors, about women in PR, about history, about missing women, about queering theories about public relations with researchers from around the world. That's one part of the podcast. The other one is looking and having conversations with women who we might catalog as role models, and so whose careers journey are inspiring for many, many reasons. And like I said, it started as an accident. I had 2 series and I thought it's done, but I think we're preparing this third.
Super cool. Well, we'll include a link to that in the show notes. Now, before we get kind of down and dirty with data, I want to go a little bit beyond the CV. And it's a question that's designed to get to the heart of you. It's the favourite question of a British mesmerist and stage performer, a man called Darren Brown. It doesn't necessarily ask us to tell you about your job. It could do. But I mean, my first question for you, Anna, is how do you spend your time?
Oh, I thought of that quite a bit. It is a tough question. I can see why. But the mesmerist, tries to really get to the heart of you. I think at the core of a lot of the things that I do throughout the day, has to do with finding balance and reflecting on the mark that we leave for posterity. And so that informs, in a sense, my research and the reading that I do. That means that no course that I teach is the same as the last. That also means that I constantly question myself. And I think my poor students need to go through my anxieties, in a sense, like, is this relevant? Is this just my view? Is my experience tempering or influencing and informing this so heavily? So that's the reflecting and the thinking part of things. I also try to find balance, and by doing that, of course, there's the engagement with others, the conversations that I have, but I also paint. I've started painting that as an effort to find balance. And I tend to paint with colors that do not listen to control. So I do, I like to play with alcohol inks, or I like to play with inks on watercolor paper where you have loads of water and these inks do whatever they want to do. So yes, very much about me learning to relinquish control and learning how to cope with that. And one more other thing that I do is, again, in terms of learning and breaking boundaries and coping with these boundaries, shifting boundaries, is that ever since the pandemic, I've started to learn to play piano. And I knew a couple of languages before, so I've been through the frustration of learning, but never with an instrument. And I find that exhilarating. That does bring me joy and balance, as that's painting, and that's all this reflecting that I do for work.
Very, very good. I love. I could easily get sidetracked down, but I love the kind of the process of transposition from a sound, or the sound that one can make using whatever instrument it might be, and then the manifestation or the representation of that in music or in tablature for playing guitar. I don't play guitar, but I have huge respect for those who can look at something which is a digitization or a representation. It's a data artifact of music, and then that gets transmitted through one's fingers, and it makes us out. Amazing. Well, your time is very full. Now, I said at the top that you describe yourself as a digital humanist. Can you tell me what you mean by that phrase? I think it's a very captivating phrase. Maybe it has a German equivalent as well, and you could tell us what that is too.
No, I don't think I've ever looked for.
It would be one long word, right?
Has to. I mean, and the good German tradition, it has to be a long word. No, I've adopted the word a couple of years ago when I realized that there was an entire area within humanities that was exploring digital methods and digital footprints. And a lot of the research that I've done particularly at the beginning of my career, was looking either at digital media and digital discourses, or was looking at how organizations, including, NGOs and activist groups, were coping with this new environment. And so whether it was scraping data, organizing data, trying to hack traditional, methods, so having a focus group online, for instance, with people all over the place, that qualifies a digital humanist. And I've enjoyed that term very, very much. One of the other things that I thought brought me closer to a job that I find really cool, so a digital humanist is closer to digital forensics. Right. So, and digital forensics is fantastic because it can be related, to crime finding and crime spotting. And it's still very much about finding clues, finding traces, finding what people leave behind. And so if you think about what I've told you before, that I like to reflect about where we come from, where we go, and what we leave, the digital space to me is almost like a new world, but we also are very careless and not very considerate, in my view, in the way we think and we clean up our internet. There's a lot of debris out there. There's a lot of junk. There's a lot of information, like it's lost in space, and this we leave with the internet. So I'm curious as well. What is it that we leave behind? What is it that we forget on purpose and we leave there? What is it that we forget because we really lost track of all the platforms that have come up and all the fads and all the buzzes and everything? And that goes into the spirit of digital humanism and keeps you into this area of humanities, of social science, but it looks also into this new world.
I think that's brilliant. I have a sister who is a absolutely stellar forensic scientist. She's kind of, her career is almost done, and she's has a track record of solving some of the hardest cold cases to solve. And she always quotes the father of modern, or the grandfather of modern forensic science, the French Edmond Locard, who says every contact leaves a trace. And I love the thought. I think when we were talking in preparation, I might have referenced that when my son, who's now 19 at university himself, was born, I created a website that had early pictures, and I can't remember. It probably lasted about a year and a half. But presumably there is some kind of trace out there. Maybe he or some. But I love that idea of the waste and like and the junk, and then, but also with legislation to the right to be forgotten and so on and so forth. So I think that's your digital humanism is a very distinctive phrase, but you unpack it beautifully. Tell me, what role does data play for you in your day-to-day work?
To me, I think everything is data, right? Whether it's unstructured information, this is how I see data. So in this sense, whether it's a contact, an interaction, a piece of, a new article that is published, that to me is all data. I'm not thinking necessarily as data points, as you might have, I don't know, marketeers think in categories and variables. As a humanist, every interaction gives you input. But I think that the value of that is what we make out of it. So the way we package, we synthesize, we analyze, we bring clusters and themes, that is what makes data valuable. So in a sense, data to me is not valuable in itself until we got our way out of it and made sense out of it.
And what challenges do you face in making sure that the data that you work with is useful to you? I mean, are there issues of cleaning or ensuring that it's intact or making it usable? Are there particular things that you challenges that you face?
There's several. Let's unpack this. So I work mostly with qualitative research, right? So qualitative research, particularly for those who like hard numbers and like to generalize, it's in itself prone to loads of criticism.
Sure.
And it is also prone to interpretation. So that's one of the first challenges, particularly in this day and age, where researchers are invited to reflect on their cultural backgrounds and their own biases, making sure that those biases and backgrounds are acknowledged is quite important to me. And my experience as an individual is very mixed. I was born and raised in Romania. I've studied in the United States. I have my doctorate from Scotland. I lived in the Middle East. I've traveled throughout Asia. I do not have anymore culturally a set framework, and I sometimes struggle with that. And that is being seen sometimes into the relativism maybe with which I approach. And I understand data because I can think, this can be this, but it can be that. And in this context, it can be this and it can be that. So that challenge of interpretation is one. The second challenge that I face, and you've mentioned cleaning it up, is very much in keeping track of what I do. And that is bringing structure and organization to the archival work. So I do collect a lot of data. I carry interviews and focus groups. We run, for instance, currently a Delphi method study, which starts qualitative, moves into quantitative. And it involves researchers in 25 countries around the world. And it's 3 different languages. And so there, I need to be very, very clear, where I put things, how I save them, where do I find them, how do I back them up, how do I go transparently about telling people what do I need and what do I keep and for how long. So with some things I've gotten better, and I teach that to my students as well, and it's easier. I do it probably from a better place of comfort, if you want. I've done this, I know what to say. But there are many other things that are up and coming that I'm still learning. And so they are prone to very much influence the way I go about how I keep my data, where I keep it. I'll just tell you a story. When I was writing my doctorate, and I was looking into discourses and framing around China and human rights during the Olympics back in 2008. And I was really curious to see whether, can you have frame promoters? You have people to say, well, on this issue, we should think like this. And there are others to say, no, we should think like this. So I was looking at how Chinese Olympic supporters, so Beijing Organizing Committee, the IOC versus Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, were looking at these issues. And then I traced the reactions to their proposed views on how we should deal with China and human rights in international media, and then in the comments section of these said international media outlets, right? To see if the frames that we were promoting were being picked up, were being set, and it's never a foolproof thing. I'm going to data. I had loads of data that I have collected. It was in multiple languages. I was working back in the day with a referencing system with a much older computer. And my thesis was almost done. I used for the analysis of the user comments Gephi or Gephi, depends on it. It's a visual analysis tool, but I was looking at language, right? How far words are apart within this text. My computer was not as powerful as this tool needed it. And not only that it crashed my computer, it crashed my thesis on top of everything else. And that came on top of the fact, that I was using this annotation, this referencing system. My luck has been that I have been teaching, and I've been teaching digitally, and I've been also working with digital data earlier on, so I had a backup. But just imagine, so I had a backup, and I had a backup of a backup, and then the computer. But just imagine that you're 300 pages in your thesis, and everything crushes under you. I mean, this is like the worst case scenario.
Unbelievable.
So that's it. I've learned that you need to be, that no matter how fascinated and how much you can love technology, particularly if you are in this area of social sciences and digital research, there's never good enough to have just one backup.
Sure.
And that you need to be quite consistent. So logically, you need to create for yourself a system that is quite consistent throughout the years into how you order your internal world so that it makes sense even years on when you go look at the same things.
God, you've given me shivers at the thought of losing, up to page 300. No, definitely not. Let's shift gear a little bit and talk about insight. I'm quite a sort of an insight geek, and my working definition is a kind of a profound and useful understanding. It's profound because it allows us to answer the question, so what do the data mean? And it's useful because it allows us to get to address the slightly more interesting question, what should we do as a result? Not necessarily process, but what steps do you take? How do you extract genuine insight from the data that you and your collaborators work with? How do you go about doing that?
I'll give you this current research as an example that we're working on, because probably the Delphi method in itself shows the process of extracting insight, as well as identifying whether any given group of experts can reach consensus quite beautifully. So a Delphi method study, in its traditional social science definition, engages a group of experts. Experts means that are people in the know and care about any given issue. And it has also prospecting, so future gazing, if you want, prospecting opportunity. And it starts qualitatively, asking these people to consider the current status or the implications or what they would like the world to be, with open-ended qualitative questions. And then it presents it feedback these answers back to them and gives them an opportunity to reflect, comment, or keep them as they are. And we do this in subsequent rounds, so much so that after the second round or so, in our case, the researchers get involved and they summarize and synthesize the information and boil it down based on what is the most common and the most frequent theme into a variety of categories. So then we move from qualitative, unstructured, to quantitative, that is structured. And then you ask the people again, but then you ask them to either rank or express their likelihood, the agreement. I very much agree, very much disagree. And you do this in another round or two. So to go back to how do you get insight? There are two ways. With this method in particular, we want to see truly what are the common themes that are emerging, right? Because in a sense, consensus means that we tend to navigate towards a common theme. Why not necessarily that we agree, but at least we identify it as a common theme. So we do this by synthesizing, bringing things together, by clustering, by putting themes on it. Now, in order to bring some level of reliability in the process, is not a singular researcher, so one person who does it. So in our case, as I said, we have a group of researchers. We started with 50 in the group in 25 countries. And our process, I'm quite proud of it because I don't think I've seen this done in other parts. We had our pre-test where we played with our questions ourselves. And now when we are working with our actual data, the way we've done it is that I've done the first round of synthesizing, summarizing, whatnot. I passed it on to my colleague, and then we've opened the group. We had a group discussion in 2 days when they could look and see. And I opened the data anonymized, but I opened the data and I said, is it anything else that you see that I have missed? And we had conversations and on the order. And now we passed it on to another 3-4 colleagues that are supposed to look at, is this English proper? Because we all speak English, but we speak foreign English. So that means that what we need to ensure is that it makes sense in English proper. And we have an Australian, a South African, and an English person involved in this process. But we also need to make sure that for those of us for whom English is not our first language, but we use it for work, is equally clear. And so in this sense, the way we extract insight first is by talking with one another and ensuring that we agree. The other way we extract insight, of course, is when we're going to get the results of the study, then the critical self is going to emerge. And there three questions that I recommend when I supervise dissertations. So master students, I tell them that their discussion section needs to answer three questions. And that is, so what did I find out? Is this, and when I answer that question, then the concern is this in line? Is it any different from current knowledge, current research? Then what is it weird? What is it that is unusual? And then, of course, if they want to go back at work and show off, for us with this research, we'll want to do that. We're going to say, who cares and what do they do with it? So in that sense, we're contributing to knowledge because we're saying, look, this is the stuff that we found out. This is how we fit or we do not fit into this continuum of knowledge. But you should care about it because, and this is what you can do about it. So I think, in a sense, it is very similar to your questions. It's just that what we do as academics, what we have to do is to inscribe our findings into a wider body of knowledge, because in academia, the assumption is that you cannot possibly know stuff. Somebody must have thought about it before. So the only thing that you can do as an academic is reimagine and rearrange the world. So that's pretty much it.
I love that, and I love your guide. I want to move on to talk a little bit about data, about combining kind of data and story and kind of data storytelling. I love that in particular because I was originally a classicist, and Aristotle in his three-act story structure, what we might call the beginning, middle, and end, or Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. Aristotle called that the thesis, the antithesis, and the synthesis. So that's a very, very nice Aristotelian bridge. Thinking about kind of effective communication, and you're doing this research in order to tell a story about what's changed, what's different, and so on. What do you think is the best way to combine narrative and numbers, stories, statistics? What do you think is the best way of doing that?
I'm not sure if it's best, but it works. So when having numbers, one of the things that I tell my students, and one of the things that I also try to do is put them in context. Humanize them, if you want. Yep. Find out an experience that people can relate to when they read that story. A couple of years ago, I remember reading, and I still have it. It's on my bookshelf. Is Dan and Cheap Heath's book, Made to Stick.
Yep.
And I think those are wonderful. This easy method of theirs that they described is absolutely fantastic, because they speak about analogies, they speak about finding the common elements. They speak about metaphors and epithets, so translating basically big numbers that I have no idea of into proxy. But one of the things that I also love about it is making it simple, thinking of who the authority is, which of course for corporate comms and PR is empowering, right? Because if you can tell communicators that it's not always your boss that needs to speak, but rather considering who's relevant in this case, it is empowering. What I also do like about it is how much they stress the importance of emotion. Numbers do not have emotion. They're dehumanizing if you want. But that they can reflect emotion if we put them into stories, if we link them to the human experience. And I think we need to do that. To you and I, it's not going to mean anything if we say that 58% of communicators feel that communications practice needs to have a social impact. But if you say that many communicators have found themselves in these recent times pondering about the legacy that they leave, realizing that pursuing values-based campaigns have divided us as much as have united us. And we talk about, I don't know, the Pepsi campaign or the whatever campaign that we know of, probably will be in a better place. Then that number is going to help us understand there are a lot of us. We can also go about differently about that number. It can be more than every second communicator. Different ways in putting numbers, but numbers on their own are just abstract.
The Heath brothers are definite heroes. I love that statistic they have that after a presentation, 5% of your audience will remember statistics, whereas a suspiciously precise 63% will remember stories. But obviously they looked at that. No, I think that's a great book, and I think you summarize their principles beautifully. I wasn't expecting one of the Kardashians to make an appearance so early in this podcast series with Kendall Jenner in the. I presume that's the Pepsi advert that you're referring to.
Yes, that's right.
That absolute abomination. I think in the show notes I might have to put a link to the Saturday Night Live spoof of that because it's so very good. I have what has become to know as the Columbo question for you. Is there anything about the way you work with data that I haven't asked you that I should have asked you?
I like that question. I wonder. Yes, I think one of the things that we do not talk enough is ownership of data. Right? We seem to take it for granted these days that, as I said, everything is data, that we can get data. We also seem to take it for granted that people, the moment they agree to get into a study, they will share everything with you. And often my experience is that is true. On the other hand, I think as researchers, and that I also think it goes beyond research, we do have a responsibility to think long and hard about what we want to do with this data and be very, very transparent about it, and also very thorough. So we need to keep those promises to the people whose data we use. So I pester my students to think thoroughly about, do you need gender? Do you need age? Do you really need to know where they work, where they live, for how many years? I don't know. These are, even if it might seem that to us, they're really traditional demographic questions, they're loaded. Asking someone about their gender is loaded. Asking someone about their identity and how they identify themselves, that's loaded. We've had this experience in our own research group. So a lot of reflection, I think, needs to be had into what do we do with the data that is given to us, but also the responsibility of that curating and keeping it. And so sharing it back, for instance, with particularly if it's qualitative research, sharing it back to the people, telling them where it is held, for how long, what are you going to plan to do with it is okay. I also think that if we have these conversations in research environments, that might help with much wider societal conversations around personal data ownership and how companies that have bigger and better, knowledge and resources to go about structuring big data, how do they go about that?
Very good. Just a couple more. What's the worst example of the misuse of data that you've observed in your career? I'm wondering if there's any clue to your PhD. I don't mean the misuse by your computer that decided to crash. I mean looking at kind of the narrative around the Chinese Olympic Committee, or maybe something else. It can be in public domain or.
No, I thought about it. I actually thought that you would ask something like that, and I know there are many data mishaps that have been reported on. So I wanted to avoid those, whether it's data leakages and hacking here and there. As an academic, I'm more concerned about the transgression, sort of in my own field, whether it's academia or public relations. And although I cannot necessarily point to you to one example, I can trade, if I may, with something that I've noticed. Two things actually that I have noticed. When we have communications offices releasing thought leadership pieces that are based on research that they've carried out, very often I find that communicators are either sloppy or they do it on purpose. I haven't decided yet, but they're completely intransparent when it comes to reporting how they collected the data. So, what's your method? What was the question that you asked? How many people did you? All this stuff that in academia, we wouldn't have published if we would not acknowledge. And I think that's highly, highly important, because if it's a thought leadership piece and you say you've carried out research, then you should be able to spend a half a page and explain how you've done it, because that gives credibility. The other thing that I've noticed also is related to data. And it goes, I sit on a couple of award committee. I learn from them a great deal, but I like to sit on those that look at comms as projects and have a mandate for measurement and evaluation. And they're difficult. I'm looking for a polite word here. Again, I have many answers of why this is done, either that people are under pressure or, they think people skim through whatever they read. But there's often campaigns that fail to get awarded. They fail to make the clear, logical progression of why did you get from here to there. And so in this sense, data is misused because communicators stop and report only at what platforms provide them in terms of reporting. Impressions, reach. Who cares? When the objective is one of either behavioral or attitudinal change, and that is not being measured on impressions and reach. That is being measured most of the time outside of the platform, asking those people that you wanted to reach. And that's why surveys are for. And or you have other ways, of analytics that you could look at, but certainly not impressions and reach. So those are my two trade-offs.
Really good. Really good. I think my wife runs a consultancy working with exclusively with academics, looking at the real world impact that their work has. And the thing that has always surprised me is that despite the fact that business has so much deeper pockets and often fritters money away on ephemera. Nevertheless, business lags academia by a long way in understanding what impact is and how to measure it. I think it's fascinating. So big up to academia. Any questions for me? Do you have any questions for me? You don't have to have any questions for me at all.
I had an entire list prepared.
Oh no! Listen, we must wrap up. But anything top line you'd like to ask me that I can give a hopefully not too glib an answer to?
Yes. What is your data mishap? The one that comes top of your mind and is also keeping you busy.
Let me give you a data mishap. It was quite. I was working not for myself, but working for a big global multinational that had a product that was based in Germany, and the team that I was working with, that was trying to make sense of this data, decided that they wanted to make use of something that was new at the time, and it was Elasticsearch. I can't tell you what Elasticsearch is, but they were going to make use of Elasticsearch. And this product was a German product that existed and was used in Germany by Germans. It also had an international flavor, but they were doing some social media analytics, and they were really excited about their use of Elasticsearch. And they said, look at this. And I don't speak very much German at all. But I noticed that I've got some ideas about the way that words are formed, and they'd created what a friend of mine refers to as the mullet of social media analytics, the word cloud. Someone thought it was called in the 80s, and there was this word cloud, and there were some German words, and it was a live, real-time thing. But then suddenly there were a whole lot of other words that were of a form that I didn't recognize, and it soon transpired they were Indonesian. And the more this program ran, this Elastic, the more Indonesian there was. And I said, why is there so much? There's no cultural connection here at all. And they said, it must be the Indonesian diaspora in Germany, which I think is almost non-existent, very, very small. But it was that was their cultural justification. My cat is making an appearance.
Really?
That was their cultural justification they said it must be that. It can't be because we've coded something that's taking the wrong type of data. So it wasn't really a use or abuse of data, but it was an absolute lie. It was, they coded something in the wrong way, and they invented this huge migration that there had been from Indonesia to metropolitan Germany. Finally, Anna, thank you so much. I've loved our conversation. It's taken us in many, many places I had never expected it to go. Can you tell our listeners, our viewers, where they can find you online, in social? Is there one particular place they should go?
I do tend to prefer LinkedIn these days more than Twitter. These recent months, I've struggled with Twitter in its format. So you can find me at Anna _Adi, or if you look for my name, I'm sure it's very easy. And there's my website, annaadi.net, so ANAADI.net.
Very good. We will include links to you on LinkedIn and to annaadi.net in the show notes. Thank you so much for making the time, and I really appreciate it. Thank you for sharing your approach to how you make smarter use of data. I think it's fair to say that if only there were more people that had your type of pragmatic approach, there would be rather less data malarkey and messing about with data, and rather more sense coming out of data in the world. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to Data Malarkey, the podcast about using data smarter. To find out what kind of data storyteller you are, why not take our data storytelling scorecard? It takes just 2 minutes to complete and will give you a personalized report right away. Visit data-storytelling.scoreapp.com or follow the link in the show notes.